Hey guys, I'm the Shino Duelist and I'm back with a video about cubes. I'll go over what a cube is, how to draft, and some good types of cards to put in your cube. Remember, if you like this sort of content, please like and subscribe and let me know in the comments below. So a cube refers to a drafting format where the owner of the cube gets to decide what is in the packs. So you set up your packs, let's say you have 8 cards per pack, you would deal out however many packs you need for all your players to have an appropriate deck. And then you would draft from those packs. Some might be more familiar with this if they've ever played a drafting format with Magic, like Magic the Gathering. This is kind of similar, but you get to pick what cards go in the draft. So if you say had a 200 card cube, you could have a 40 card deck and that would support 5 players to all get 40 card decks. A 30 card deck with the same amount of cards could support 6 players, and a 20 card deck could support up to 10 players. So you could actually have a small tournament there if you wanted to, and I know some people who do. Now, I personally have around a 200 card cube here, and you can do all sorts of different custom rules and things to make your cube unique, as well as, of course, the cards you pick to go in it. Also, you can do an extra deck. That's totally optional. That's up to you and the format that you're trying to make. Usually, when I'm playing with 4 people, that means we'll have a 10 card extra deck. I typically just do Exceeds and Synchros because they tend to be the most simple cards to go into, and usually the most generic as well. Of course, links would be fine, but that kind of gets a little complicated, and a lot of the people that play want to play with more old school stuff. So I like keeping it a little bit more old school with just Synchros and Exceeds. So when you are making your packs, if you have 4 players and you want to play a 40 card deck, that means you'll need 160 cards for each player to have a 40 card deck. I like to do 8 card packs. So 160 divided by 8 is going to be 20. That means you need to have 20 packs of 8 cards. So you would take your cube and you would just start dealing out until you got to 8 cards per pack. And let me see. So anyways, each player sitting at the table would start with a pack. And I like to go counterclockwise with this, or clockwise, either way, it doesn't really matter. But you would have your pack that you would be looking at, and you would pick your first card out of the pack. You typically would get the strongest card or the most generic card that would be good for you, maybe Card Destruction. And I make my players pick their first card face up. And then you would pass your pack. You would get one from the next person. Now, this is your pack that you're looking at. It's down 1 card. After this, every card that you pick, I like to put face down so that they know what power card you picked. But then everything after that is kind of, well, not unknown because people have seen what are in the packs, but they don't know exactly what you picked every time. And then, of course, you would pass that and you'd get another pack that has a less card until you're down to 1. And then that's that first round done once all cards have been picked, and you get another 4 packs for all 4 players. And of course, you can vary this as much as you want. You could have 5 cards per pack. You could have, pretty much anything. But it's all up to you, and that's what makes it a little bit flexible, and you can find what is most fun for your group. Now, like I said before, you can absolutely have your own house rules, and some of mine are the player who goes first does draw, kind of like back in the old days, as well as if you there's only one field spell that can be played at a time. So you play a field spell, and if your opponent plays a field spell, it destroys the one that you played. That's again how it kind of used to be, and I'm shooting for more of an old school feel for my cube. Lastly, and this is probably the most important for mine, all types are treated as all types. So if you have a card that says search a dragon monster, you can search any monster. So it ends up creating a lot of cool combos that most people wouldn't see or wouldn't be possible otherwise without that ruling. For example, Lone Fire might be able to attribute itself and search any or special any monster from the deck. Actually, I have a few cards right here out of my cube that specifically work well with this. This is Evil Dragon Ananta, and my camera will focus. It has to banish reptile monsters from the field and graveyard to special summon itself, gains a bunch of attack when it does so, and gets to pop cards. Then I have Super Ancient Dino Beast, where you can tribute summon him using one tribute as long as that tribute is a dino. Well, that works with any monster here. And instead of having a dinosaur special from the grave to draw a card, any monster special from the graveyard gets to draw you a card. Then we have Vic Viper T301, which needs light machines to do its thing, but instead it just needs light monsters. Iron Draw needs 2 machine monsters to basically be a pot of greed, but instead you just have to control 2 monsters to activate it. It's very nice. This is Alien Brain. It's when a reptile monster you control is destroyed by battle, you get to steal their monster, but actually, since we're playing by these type rules, if any monster you control is destroyed by battle, you can steal their monster. So it makes it a much more versatile and strong card to use. So those are some examples of how you can adjust your rules. And again, you don't have to go with just mine. You can do whatever you want, but that's how you can change the whole feel of different cards that may not be good otherwise and turn them into powerhouse cards for your own cube. Besides that, you can run banned cards if you want to. It's totally up to you. I also typically only run one of each card. That's just me. You can run multiples if you'd like, but I like to keep it to singletons to make sure the games stay fresh and you don't see too many of the same cards in every deck. But like I was saying, you can run plenty of banned cards and strong cards from older formats. And it typically, depending on how you balance your deck, you get to make these cards fair to play. Like Dimension Fusion, it's very strong and strong enough to get banned because people would build specifically whole banished decks that would bring everything back and so on and so forth. Where this card in this format is pretty fair because it's very hard to consistently build a deck that lets you banish all your stuff and then special it back for a big combo or whatever else you need. Cyberjar is very strong in this format, but it is fair enough because you only get to use this effect once. You're not playing 3 of it. You might be able to search it out depending on some different combos, but otherwise it does end up feeling fair enough. Same with all these other draw cards and things because the game is slow enough, the format that I've got going, that it does feel like a strong card to play, but not overly powerful. And while it's fun to have powerful cards, you also need to have a good mixture of other not so powerful cards so that when you do play those big cards, it feels impactful. For example, you might want to play some cards like some of these here, where they're not exactly good, but they can be situationally good. Cup of Ace, it's a risky card to play, but it could still net you a +2, or make your opponent draw 2. It's unfortunate, but that's the risk. And when you're doing your draft, and you have a pack of 8, you take a card, you pass it on, then this might end up being one of the few cards left over, and you can kind of time it so where one of your opponent ends up with one of these. Not necessarily every time, but it does happen. Same thing with Guarded Treasure here. This card is honestly one of my favorites. It's kind of definitely bad, but you discard 5 cards. It's a continuous spell, but then over time, every draw phase that you have, you draw 2 cards instead of 1. It's risky to do this. It does synergize well with cards that have effect in the graveyard, and again, you'll just start outgrinding your opponent by being able to draw 2 cards every turn. Of course, this could get popped right after you use it, and maybe that makes this definitely not worth it, but, well, it's just one of the risky things that you might have to do. And then you can have some just awful cards, but what they do is give your opponent or yourself a chance to be resourceful and find a way to use them. A great example of this is this card, Oops. This card, Oops, says it just says you destroy a monster you control, or actually a card you control, and that means that if that's all it does, it's kind of bad for the most part. But if you can figure out how to combo it with something like this Great Cobra, which when it's destroyed by a trap lets you steal a monster, you can absolutely win games with it. And that's actually what I saw one of my good friends do, is that he actually didn't even read this card properly and thought it just said pop a monster in the field. And he ended up having to destroy his own card on accident, but it stole the BLS that he was into and was able to attack twice per game afterwards. So things like that kind of come up, and it makes cards that may not be good at all into winning combos. Now when it comes to a format design, you need to make sure that you have answers to the cards that you place in here. If you put in a lot of back row lockdown effects, then you need to make sure that you have answers to those back row effects or powerful monsters or whatever else you have in here for people to pick. Like single target destruction, spell and trap destruction. You may not need to have a bunch of negation. You can, but it might end up being too negate heavy. It just kind of depends on what you're doing. But if you have some powerful cards in here, you have to have some way for your opponent to handle them, or else somebody will flip up a skill drain, and then the other player will be like, all right, well, there were no MSTs or any sort of spell and trap destruction in the draft, so I just lose. That's not going to be fun for people. You can have things like that, but you just have to make sure that you have answers to them within your cube. And lastly, keep an eye out for some older cards that tend to work well or could work with your format, even if they weren't good back in the day or they aren't good now. Either way, they can still be fun to use in your cube. You just kind of have to have an eye for that. As well as new cards coming out that can be very good in your cube. Like Jelly Cannon shuffles one back into the deck, and that's just a strong effect to have. I think a monster has to declare an attack, but that's just still a wonderful effect. And then Soul Levy is kind of mills out your opponent a little bit whenever a monster is special summoned. But that actually can be very strong, especially if you are running smaller decks. Instead of a 40 card deck, if you did a 30 card or a 20 card, this card gets stronger and stronger just depending on the size of the decks. And that might change depending on how many people are playing. That's totally up to you. And just like that, this card becomes much, much more powerful and much more sought after. It can change how the cube goes and the draft goes. And finally, make sure to rotate your cube. If you play with the same cards for a year, people are just going to get bored with them. So typically after I draft with my friends, do a little tournament or something like that, I will rotate out a few cards each time and swap in new stuff. And I typically rotate out the cards that are either way too strong for the cube that I have, or I rotate out cards that are just not very fun. And that's just get some feedback from the people you play with, ask them what they did and didn't like, and kind of get a feel for what works or not. For example, card D, it ends your turn after you use it, and if you weren't able to draft a back row heavy, set a bunch, and then control the game from there, this card can just be really not fun. And actually, Dandelion, while I do have a Synchro and Xseed extra deck, and there are Synchros or available, tuners available, things like that, it just ended up not being very strong, and people had to really struggle to do anything with it, which is not necessarily an issue, but it could be better served for some other cards. For example, a card like Deep Diver, when it's destroyed by battle, you can put any monster on the top of your deck, which in this format is actually decently strong enough to be considered a good effect because it lets you search any monster in your deck. Something like Cyber Valley, besides having the other 3 effects that let you tribute cards to draw 2 or so on and so forth, you can stop a battle phase completely by tributing this card, I think. Or, sorry, you banish this card, draw 1 card, and end the battle phase. So that right there stalls you for a turn while letting you draw cards, and I think is just an overall pretty good card for the speed of this format. Well, that about wraps it up, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know if you have any questions down in the comments, and please feel free to subscribe and like the video if you like the video. I've got Instagram and Twitter, and I guess Facebook as well, and I do post things from time to time on there, especially stuff like custom cards I make or any sort of artwork alters, things like that. So if you like to keep up with that sort of stuff, I typically do that more on Instagram, Twitter, things like that. But you could also keep up with when I'm releasing videos as well. With that, I'm the Shino Duelist, and I'll see you next time.